United Launch Alliance, and then again this year with ERG. We had motion practice with ERG that allowed us access to taxpayer records that'll support the case. So we're prevailing on those motions across the street in Superior Court. We're prevailing at the Assessment Appeals Board, and we're bringing about settlements. And again, the money goes, to the general fund, to the fire department, to special districts, but primarily schools.
And you're not trying to collect any more, right? We're not trying to be any more aggressive than what they actually owe.
Right. Starting with the assessor's constitutional duty to assess at full market value and then to collect that money, which is really a service to the other taxpayers who are paying.
I totally get what you're saying about that you're, on a number of other issues, I think we might be driving companies out, but on property tax, it's like, hey, this is what the bill is.
Yeah, but see, my point is not that they're not doing their job. I said they're doing their job. My point is taxes are too high in California, so we're shooting ourselves in the foot. And for instance, with Vandenberg, now that they've got all this competition, and here's the point: if the Board of Supervisors wants to keep Vandenberg and they want to keep that tax money coming, and if they want to keep the oil company money coming, they've got to do what they can to lighten up on county regs and get the state to lighten up on things, including the tax rate, because they have options now that they used to not have, especially at Vandenberg. I got a call from Boeing a few years ago on an APCD. It was either Boeing or one of the other companies. They were bringing in a satellite by barge, and they said, the APCD wants us to mitigate the air emissions from the barge. And that kind of stuff, when people hear that kind of stuff, they think, I don't want to do business there. And again, this is not all you, it's mostly state driving this stuff. But again, you're supposed to be the voice for the community and the economy back to the state, because it matters in the end as far as business decisions go. Thank you.
Questions from the board? We'll just give the opportunity to just talk about the beginning of that line on D12. The problem that we identified in going to a visit at dispatch. I just asked them randomly, what's your most common call for service? And I thought it would be a healthcare emergency call, but it's false alarms. And at least the anecdotal information I got, and we'll get some more comprehensive information, is that the high flyers are not in rural areas, but that there is a huge cost to many calls coming from a small number of residences. And it's a cost that the consumers already pay, but that the companies pass on none of the revenue they receive from false alarms when we bear all the cost. So the alarm companies don't send people out when there's an alarm. Our officers go out when there's an alarm call, and yet they charge their consumers for it, which is kind of a really amazing thing when you think about it. That alarm companies can somehow get away with charging charging consumers for something that we pay for, and they don't. I don't necessarily have it all worked out, but I do think that's something that we need to talk about, because if we don't want the system to be abused and we want at least some cost recovery here, then it's something that we should probably do something about. Any other questions before we get to budget summary and wrap up? Thank you. Mr. Frappwell, you're back up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, that does bring us to complete circle. So we'll go to just to reiterate our financial challenges ahead that we talked about earlier this morning. And these are the 6 bullet points here that we're mindful of as we look forward into our future, that have to be, the decisions we make short term are kind of within this context of knowing where our biggest challenges are moving forward. And these are important issues. The public safety communication system, General Services, together with the public safety partner departments, are starting this process to look at what is our long-term solution. How do we place the county to best meet new and emerging technology in this important arena, and how do we keep our first responders informed and safe? Our deferred maintenance needs no other comment from me. It's been well documented. Change of legislation and regulations, employer-related cost increases. We think the new MOUs being negotiated, and some have already been approved by your board, are key in sharing the long-term pension liabilities and the risk that we have moving forward. Technology is one of those things that really will help us reshape how we provide key services to our customers and constituents that rely on our services every day. And then certainly the cannabis tax, although we're pleased with the tax and we're pleased that the voters passed that, it's going to be something that has to be monitored carefully as we move into the future to see how that performs and whether the more global market has any kind of impact on the long-term revenues. So this is something that we're pleased to see, and we're cautiously optimistic, but we'll have to watch carefully. So these are kind of the challenges, as I said, that we're looking forward on and making sure we're mindful of as we make these immediate budget decisions. With that, let me take you back to this slide. These are, again, the same slides earlier today. These are the potential adjustments to your recommended budget as you guys begin your deliberations and discussion of how to, what you'd like to include in the adopted budget for next fiscal year. So the sources we've recommended or identified here are $376,200 that is currently unallocated discretionary ongoing revenues, potentially $4.6 million in cannabis tax revenue, which our recommendation is to treat as one-time for one-time purposes if your board decides to appropriate this. And then there is a $10,000 left over in one-time emerging issues fund balance. And below that, in potential uses, these are some of the uses that have been identified since workshop. These, in addition to the ones the restoration expansion requests that have not been funded in the recommended budget that rolled over to hearings, as we discussed earlier this morning, would all be things that your board may want to consider in your deliberation process. With that, Mr. Chairman, we refer back to your board, or be happy to answer any questions your board might have.
Supervisor Wolf.
Mr. Frapwell, thank you for getting us this latest information. I just have a couple of questions and maybe some concerns with this chart, and that has to do with the cannabis tax revenue. What I believe we should do is put the total cannabis tax anticipated revenue of $6,300,000 with the recommended decreases of $1,700,000 with this projected balance, and put it in as a fund balance on that page 14. And the reason I'm suggesting that is because, well, for two reasons. First, we don't know. This is an unknown how much tax we're going to be getting. And because it's unknown, and if it's going to be spent, we may be spending money that we don't have. That's the first reason. The second reason is that what we heard today is that there could be other uses for this tax. One was noted from probation, and the other was from behavioral wellness. So I think that this Measure T cannabis tax should be put away as a separate fund, and then as we want to use it, it comes back to the board, or the CEO makes a determination on the use of that balance, assuming it's $4,600,000. So then the question remains, is there any other ongoing source of money? And I would suggest that another one-time source of money would be the property tax I want to say refund, but backfill. Because my sense is that when we got that from the legislature, it was to literally backfill some of the uses that we need to backfill in our community. And so that seems to be a better source for one-time money. And then I would suggest, because the strategic fund was mentioned, and I think that, sorry, Mr. Gazzoni, you gave a, good push there for your litigation fund, but I think we could take $1 million from the litigation fund, $1 million from program stabilization, and $1 million from contingency, by the way, leaving contingency with $3 million, and put that money into strategic reserve. And so basically, it's just reformulating or reformatting the source of money. Again, I feel really strongly that for us to depend right now on the cannabis tax revenue when we don't have it would be a mistake. And likewise, I think we have the money from the backfill, that if people want to use that, that to me makes more sense. I am very, would be very cautious in using this one-time money. I think, and it would be under emerging issues. I think we have not only the emerging issues that you mentioned, Mr. Frapwell, but I go back to the North County Jail. I think that is going to be a big hit on the county, and we have to always keep that in the back of our minds. So for me, when we get to the point of looking at that attachment E, I know for me, I'm going to be very conservative in spending the allocation, whether it be this 4.6 or the 4.4 as I'm suggesting. I really do believe that we need to be very prudent this year and keep some money available for those items that you've mentioned. And then just finally, one other thought that I have is for the ongoing, the $376,000. We've talked about Renew 22, and I think it's shown some really good results, but we've got $800,000 in the budget, ongoing money. And I know that most of it would be used for audit expenses, and I think from the BIF it would be $600,000 would be used for that. So I'm suggesting that we add for the ongoing another $200,000. I don't know how it's going to be spent, but maybe it'll go to libraries or other things. But I think to keep $800,000 for Renew 22, I think we can take out a little bit to keep it into ongoing and maybe fund some of the positions that were mentioned here today from the district attorney's office, the probation department, and any others. But I think maybe having a little bit more money to work with. So those are my thoughts. But again, I really feel very strongly that we should not be depending on cannabis tax. Put it in a separate fund and let a committee or the CEO's office determine how that money is being used.
So we will put up the Excel spreadsheet after a break and go around so that people can specifically put that up. But I think Supervisor Wolf's comments maybe look to us to put up not just these, but put up the property tax backfill in case there is some need there. Mr. Gazzoni?
Chair and supervisors, either now or when more convenient for the board, the auditor, budget director, CEO, and I have discussed this concept of cannabis funds and where should they go, and I could give a quick summary now if that would be helpful.
Yes.
So as you know, every year in balancing the budget, the sources must equal the uses, and then through 3 sections of the Budget Act, actually anticipate situations where the county may receive amounts that are in excess of anticipated revenues in some category, and basically flow charts out where should those funds go. So as you're coming up with how much, as Supervisor Wolf said, how much cannabis revenue is reliable at this point, that's a number that was worked on by CEO's office and auditor in formulating the budget. And one way to do this, per the Budget Act, would be to look at revenues that come in above that dam, and those would go into some form of identified fund balance, which we can discuss in more detail. And that money would be essentially fenced off. It would go into that account and then would be subject to future appropriation by the board through a 4/5 vote.
Can I name the account?
Yes, I think you
Supervisor Adam already has, the Bank of Unicorns and Rainbows.
That's right. I think that should be the official name of it. I'm not sure I will vote for a budget that doesn't have that as the official name. Supervisor Hartman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a question for either CEO Miyasato or Mr. Frapwell about Supervisor Wolf's suggestion. I guess it was my understanding that with the cannabis money, we wouldn't really spend it until we actually had it come in. And so I guess I'd like some of your thoughts about the switch in how we anticipate, how we categorize the revenue that we will spend.
Supervisor Hartman, through the chair, I do think it's the appropriate sensitivity to have about cautionary note of spending money before we have it. I will tell you, overarching, that we have done in concert with the Auditor Controller's Office a detailed analysis of the potential revenue we may receive from the cannabis tax. We have been very cautious in that estimation and calculation. We have essentially stress tested the assumptions on each of those potential revenue sources. Specifically to your question, if your board chooses to appropriate the 4.6 or some number above the even beyond the 1.7, it would be helpful to tie those expenses to, or tie that revenue to expenses that can be initiated as the year progresses, so that we know that we're receiving that revenue stream. And so whether that's something that we come back to you after Q2 and saying, here's our revenue and our updated projection for the balance of the year, and so that gives your board additional comfort that those revenues really are there to pay for those expenses, that would be an option. We certainly would, though, recommend they are utilized for one-time purposes. Understanding there's a backdrop, the backdrop, if that expense was incurred and the revenue does not materialize to the extent we project, understanding that would have to come from some other sources within the county.
Supervisor Lavanino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you got to give them the answer you gave me. So I was the one that was like, we had a pregame, and I was like, man, there's no way I'm spending money I don't have. And you reminded me that we don't have the TOT yet, and we don't have our property tax yet. So we are making educated guesses that these are projections, and they're done with the best intentions and the best the facts that we have at the time. And you know, I was all for just taking all the cannabis tax revenue and putting it in the strategic reserve. That works for me, but I'm not really sure that's why people voted for the tax to start with, wasn't to just put it in the strategic reserve. So, but I think the main point is we don't have the TOT and we're all willing to spend that, and we don't have the property tax yet and we're all willing to spend that. So if you could comment on that.
Supervisor Lavanino, I think we are saying the same thing. Just the cautionary note is we've stress tested it. We think that we understand the revenues. We think we understand the amount we're able to get, and which is why we've arrived today with your board of a total 6.3 coming from cannabis tax. The first 1.7 allocated to enforcement, and we do think the 4.6 is available for your board's appropriation should you desire to do so.
Chair Williams?
Yes.
And Supervisor Lavanino? That is, you know, an option, and what we did discuss was that treat it as one-time money, and if you did appropriate anything on this list, that also is one-time money, so that should that revenue not materialize, then we could strip out that appropriation along with the reduction in revenue. I would submit that, Supervisor Lavanino, the difference with the cannabis tax is that we have no history. Of course, with all the other taxes, we have history, and we're able to, you know, do regression analysis and projections. This is all based on a large number of assumptions, and so then I think we were just advocating for some, you know, conservative approach to this, and you know, and this is one way to do it. I mean, literally, another way to do it is to not appropriate any of it, and then that money, when collected, would come into the county, and let's just use an example. If some of the other tax revenues do not show up, if this money is not appropriated, and this could actually backfill in the actual revenue, any shortfalls that would come in other revenues, in the general revenues, this revenue could backfill that without any kind of budgetary action. And then in addition to that, you know, towards the end of the year, if you do collect, and you will need to have a 4/5 vote to appropriate the revenue. If you didn't appropriate now during the budget with a 3/5 vote, then during the year you would have a 4/5 vote to appropriate any of the revenue that does come in during the year. And you know, actually, that might give you, you know, potentially more flexibility in the backfill of any revenues that might not show up. And in addition to that, if it falls to fund balance at the end of this next fiscal year, then that could be appropriated with a 3/5 vote in the subsequent year during the budget process, as opposed to requiring the 4/5 vote. So there are other options for flexibility purposes, but of course the ultimate budget decision is yours.
And I don't think anybody's saying we have to spend all $4.6 million. This is just one-time money. If we want to put it into any type of fund balance, we could, or a portion of that. I mean, I don't see $4.6 million worth of things that I want to spend money on anyway. So I would just as soon be putting a big chunk of it when we get to our Schedule E into some sort of reserve. Because the last thing I want to do is get to the point where I see the state of California is, and they have anticipated revenue from it, and because it takes a while to get things started, for example, I don't think we're going to be able to do any retail at least until the beginning of next year. And so, you know, I would much rather have something that was golden than, you know, us hoping some money came in. But I appreciate the fact that it's been stress tested and everything. When we get to Schedule E, I won't be spending it all up. I'm going to be trying to save as much of it as I can. So for next year, we're able to do what we would really want to do with it.
And I think that the only thing to counterbalance that with in thought, I mean, I'm okay that to think, well, we need to have some of that in reserves in case there's further action, or some of that in different priorities. But in my view, putting revenue that we, even by this conservative of a crowd, think is going to come in, is pretty sure bet that we know some of that money is going to come in. And if we just have it allocated into a fund balance, it's tantamount to already deciding that we're going to spend it on deferred maintenance, because we know that's just about the only thing we can get a 4/5 vote for. So, I mean, if that's what your long-term game is, then maybe that's a smart long-term game. But so that, I guess, would be my counterpoint to that. Mr. Adam, speaking of deferred maintenance.
Well, the term sure bet is kind of like famous last words. You know, I think the only prudent thing to do, since this thing's so untested, is put whatever comes in this year away and in a reserve, and then pull it back out after it really comes true. And you know, I don't see why it would hurt to defer spending it for a year, and just make sure that it really comes true.
Supervisor Wolf.
Yeah, as it is, we're already pretty much committed to the $1,700,000. A part of that is from this tax, and people are probably going to be going out, hopefully, and hiring for the processing and enforcement. And so we're committed to that right now. And I see nothing wrong with us holding off and waiting to see what comes in rather than making any commitment on these other things. And again, I go back, if people do want to look at one-time sources, look at our property tax backfill. That's what the governor and legislature gave to us for our losses in property tax. And part of that, I think it was 1.8, was for this current fiscal year. And certainly we should be using that to provide services. And in my calculation, we still have the opportunity to refund or to pay back part of our strategic reserve. And there still may be, and I thought, Mr. Frapwell, you had mentioned this, that aside from the property tax backfill, that in the May revise there was also additional money for, was it for emergency operations during the debris flow that we're going to be getting back?
Supervisor Wolf, with the chair, the governor's budget as it currently exists today does assume a waiver of the local share of the debris removal cost. So this is really a cost avoidance on our behalf. It does not generate, I don't believe, new revenue to us, but it is a cost avoidance.
Okay. I think it's just transparency in budgeting. It's not spending money we don't have, even though we're hearing from our folks, although a little bit of a disagreement on how much or how confident we can be. And it's also taking the money for property taxes and putting it, and not even putting it for ongoing, but at least the one time. And I do, I'm going to go back to the $200,000 for ongoing so that we can fund some of the positions that are needed.
I would just argue that the cannabis tax at this point is more likely to come through than the state budget. The property tax backfill, I think, will come through in the state budget, but the state budget is not passed yet, and Measure T has passed. We're both talking about stuff we think are going to happen, not things that have definitely happened. And I view this as a tough balance, because the two big ticket items that are needs is strategic reserve and deferred maintenance. The other stuff is a relatively small amount of money. The math makes it difficult to both fund strategic reserves to the tune that the CEO would prefer, and fund deferred maintenance to the tune that I think some of you would like to fund. So I think that's the hard part, is both of those items are so large. There's you got to use the money on the table for one or both of those, unless you're going to abandon both. Mr. Lavanino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just totally have a completely different view of the backfill money. We wrote a check out of the strategic reserve of $6.2 million to cover those costs, and we got back a check for $4.4 million. So we're not even paying back what we took out of the strategic reserve. And you know, I think anytime you take money out of the strategic reserve for a specific purpose, and that was, excuse me, that was a huge chunk. We only had $30 million in there, and we took out $6 million. We've got to put that money back in there. And I know you're saying it's cannabis tax, but at the same time, we're also saying we're not sure we're going to get the cannabis tax. So that money came out of the strategic reserve. For me, it's got to go back into the strategic reserve. And there's other ways that we can find to fund some of these smaller things that we need to do or want to do. But, you know, I just think that would be irresponsible to take the money out and then not put it back in when we got the check back.
I'm going to go to Supervisor Hartmann, but just a note, remember we're going to take a break and then we're going to do the Schedule E, the Excel spreadsheet where we start putting the math together. Supervisor Hartmann?
I agree with Supervisor Lavanino. I think that we need to restore the strategic reserve as soon as we can. I also believe that you're correct. He's correct in that when people voted for the tax, the marijuana tax, the cannabis tax, we put on the narrative what it was going to be spent for, and we didn't say strategic reserve. So I would feel disingenuous not by switching those monies around. I think now we are looking at the budget as a whole, so I think what we want to do is allocate the funding. My question, and with a 3/5 vote, if that's what it takes, I think trying to deal with things one by one in the future as they come up is not a responsible way to do it. These are the hearings where we look at relationships among things and make a decision. So I guess the question, though, is can we hold off on, can we wait till the money comes in till we actually spend it? That's the concern.
Supervisor Hartmann, through the chair, your board could certainly do that. You could appropriate the funds, but under my direction, working with the departments not to spend anything until end of first quarter, end of second quarter, until we have more experience with actually what is coming in. The only item on there that I think we really would need to fund, I think, is for libraries, if your board wants to do that, because they would need some certainty, I would think, at the beginning of the year. These other things are really one-time funding projects, and you could hold off, you could appropriate now and hold off on actually spending until sometime in mid-year.
Supervisor Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the bottom line is, and just given the comments, is that we're not certain of two things now. We're not certain of the cannabis tax, and we're not certain of the backfill. And I'm okay if we take the backfill money and put it back into strategic reserve. I feel then that the one-time money, the source of funds, similar to what CEO Miyasato said, should probably be taken off the table. And the libraries, we can move up to the ongoing, which we'll be doing in the next session. But I think to be responsive and responsible, that we take those two big ticket items off of the spending schedule for now and look at it later once we have the money in hand. And I might add, we're actually, just given everything I said, we're actually still funding some of the enforcement and licensing positions. So there is still an assumption, very, very conservative, that we're going to have some cannabis money to pay for that, which obviously it's where we need to start. But I'm okay. Let's just put it into strategic reserve and no one time.
Let's take a break, and we'll put up that Excel spreadsheet. How about 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? We're ready to reconvene.
Fun time.
Yeah. You got this thing.
We're reconvening, folks.
Maybe not.
So I'm going to tell you now, Paul over here is good, but he's not superhuman. So when we go through our requests, I would appreciate everyone going slow so we do not have clerical errors. And assuming we can get close to a consensus, we will take a further break to be able to make sure everything is vetted before a final vote. So I see a light. Supervisor Hartman.
Well, I'm ready to be the guinea pig in this. I'd like to say that my guiding principles are, I want to be conservative, and I hear that up here among my colleagues. and to refund the strategic reserve and get it up to full funding as soon as possible. So I'm very pleased with the CEO's recommendation of $4.4 million, and I would like to add additional money back into the reserve, and I think some can come from cannabis, just not all. I think that would be irresponsible. As I look to expansions and restorations, it's really those that can generate savings or revenue for the future that are my priorities. So for ongoing, I would start first with the ESI team project leader for $75,000, and that is because that can generate a lot of grant opportunities and additional funding. In addition, I think 150 for libraries, and I would like to see that prioritized, as Ms. Saley suggested, for those unincorporated libraries. And then that's it for the ongoing for me. And then for the one time, I would like to see $50,000 as the CEO recommended to support libraries with a consultant so that we can deal with this issue in an ongoing way. Rather than having each year coming back, what are we going to do about library funding? And I'd just like to say, our county departments all had to reduce by 5%. And so, I mean, for the libraries within cities to not have to cut back, to me, doesn't seem fair. The cities step up. So for deferred maintenance, $1.1 million. For strategic reserve, $1.5 million. And then I want to talk about the Parks Master Plan. As many of you know, the Park Bond Prop 68 did indeed pass $4.1 billion for parks in California. And to situate the county like we were situated for SB1, to pull more than our weight, we need to develop not just a list of projects, but a set of relationships and how they connect and reinforce one another and demonstrate a vision and support our policy goals. So just in the 3rd district, south to north, we have Walter Capps Park, we have Barone Ranch with a plan underway, we have Gaviota Marine Terminal, we have Halama Beach Park, where we just have a new updated master plan. We're going to get some funding, we hope, from the Coastal Commission. We've got Guadalupe Dunes, we've got Point Sal, we've got Kachuma and Hoey, and these link to other opportunities in the state parks, the National Forest, and land trust properties such as Arroyo Hondo and Midland. So instead of just saying, oh, we'll put some new RV spaces at Kachuma, or we'll build something more at Halama, or we may put something at Nahoe, I want us instead to look at the whole and determine things like this. Where do we want accommodations? What kind and what price points? In North County, we have a real lack of unpaid parking. Trails and connectivity. It's really important to have a destination and connectivity. The distribution of parks and trails across the county. North County is tremendously underserved compared to both National and North County. Different kinds of recreational opportunities. Disc golf, water features, pools, play structures, tennis courts, ball fields, picnic areas, interpretive and current, possibly a visitor center, birding, wildlife watching, historic sites, all the things that a bigger plan, a bigger look would take into account. Concessionaire opportunities, generating opportunities. There's a movement afoot in public health. In our county, the Trails Council has partnered up with Central Hospital with a Healthy People House and Trails. There's also an initiative in our county, Healthy Living, and that many cities are taking on. So these are a strategic plan. In addition, not to buy stuff, but to have meaningful experiences, and we need to package it up. So I am eager to put $350,000 into a park master plan so that we're in a position where we can take advantage and pull more than our county's weight, because we're centrally located between the two big metropolitan areas in our state. And so we have a real opportunity here. I believe the hydrology study is significant, but we heard that we can probably get that funded from another source. I think the cloud-based
Can I just interrupt you for a second? So, because he's good, but not infallible. I think you had 50,000 is not what you just said with libraries. No. I think you said 150 plus 50?
Oh, he got it right.
Okay. Oh, he got it right on two different things.
Right.
Okay.
I split library between ongoing and one time.
One time. Got it.
Okay.
Understood.
Cloud-based internet.
So he is infallible.
Our county employees are very good at their jobs. Cloud-based internet, 500,000. I think we absolutely must do that. First job of the county is being ready for emergencies. Homeless tracking, I believe 10,000. That is absolutely required. I would like the utility-grade solar ordinance started at the fourth quarter of this year. I'd like to put 80,000 there, because I think it's gonna generate revenue over time. Short-term rental, split the difference, 70,000. Clean energy roadmap, I think this is very, very significant at 150,000, and that does it for me. What was the last one?
Supervisor Wolf.
Well, thank you, everyone, for all your input. We didn't hear a lot from the public today, but we certainly have over these last few months as we've started the budget workshop, and here we are now at the budget hearing. I appreciate all the input from our department heads and your staff. You know, as this is my last year, you know, through 12 budget sessions, I think I've always tried to be a realist, and I'm not going to spend money.
So, you know, lights, I'll go ahead on mine. On the ongoing,
excuse me, sorry. Supervisor Wolf, what was the probation amount, the DPO? On your ongoing.
Thank you. The DPO amount that I have is 120,000. And did you add? You did add the. Yes, the two. Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Wolf, just for clarity's sake, on your column then for cannabis tax revenue, I'm assuming that 4.6 would be zero. You're saying not to spend it on these expenditures, or?
Correct. I'm taking. Just remove the 4.6.
Thank you.
So I agree on the ongoing. I agree with the ESI team project leader. I agree with libraries, but I'm with Joan's suggestion that it should be spent on small libraries. I think it's hard to differentiate just unincorporated areas, even though that would help me substantially. But I would say 180 is we should try to strive for that, because that's the amount that we did last year. I am not okay with using this revenue for it, but I guess I could be convinced that we could find something to get the probation started, but maybe you could put a question mark there, and what I'll explain that. Yeah, I wouldn't put the actual amount yet, because I think that ongoing we could use that or use marijuana revenue ongoing, but for the first year that if that we should not, because I can't see how everything will balance out yet. I might be persuaded. I would even suggest that there is some public safety funds sitting around that we could use for that. But and I'm going to put in something new. I asked Mr. Nielsen about it in front of y'all. We have real need for resource parents. You know, we've discussed this many times before when we talked about foster care. We have this little list this long of how many resource parents we have in this county, so we're exporting kids out of county, and we're exporting kids from the South Coast to the North County, which I think is doesn't say good things about us. And part of the problem could be recruitment, but part of the problem is retaining and providing support for the resource parents, foster parents that we do have. For a year-long position, that would be $120,000. If that's too much, I think at least starting the position midway through the fiscal year, and or giving Mr. Nielsen a chance to leverage some other funds for it. So I would say to at least put $60,000 there. Let's move on to the second section. I agree 1.1 for the deferred maintenance and 1.5 for the strategic reserve. And I'll just say the reason why this has been difficult, because I actually normally would err on trying to put a little bit more in the maintenance because you know, we get so little when our money sits in our bank account. But of course, this last winter proved how useful having money in the strategic reserve has been. So I'm very torn on that. To me, those are the two big ticket items, and it's impossible to fund them both to the level that we should. But we should make an attempt on both. I'm with the $50,000 for the library for us to try to keep on searching for the perfect solution that seems to elude us, and with the $350 for the Parks Master Plan. I agree that the hydrology study should come out of flood control, but that we should fund it. I agree with the cloud-based internet and the homeless tracking. I think I definitely believe that we need the utility scale solar ordinance. I don't know how grade got in there, but it's utility scale or grade, whatever we want to call it. I wanted 250, but I'd be happy with 180, I guess. But I feel like I would be not consistent, and along with it, a necessary part of that is the 150 for the clean energy roadmap, because that's identifying the target sites. But I do not feel like I would be consistent with what I have said about economic development if I funded the utility scale solar ordinance, environmental review, and didn't fund the Union Valley. So you can put me down for the Union Valley one as well, which is 155,800.
You're not going to extract anything for that?
I think I'm just trying to be consistent, and sometimes negotiation can mean holding back, and sometimes negotiation can mean put your cards on the table. And, I guess that's what I'm trying to do. I don't think I'm leaving anything out. I mean, I came in today just so that I'm putting all my cards on the table, thinking that maybe we needed to put some money for short-term rentals. So I believe that what we should be trying to do is find a compromise and extend the historical overlay. You may be using some more inclusive criteria for historical. I don't know that we need to budget 102,000, but 70 sounds good to me. I don't think we should. I guess what I think is it's time that we try to have a good compromise on the measure, and I think there's a way to do that. yeah, but I think that will take some staffing to achieve. I was planning on asking for some other things, but I think given, you know, the fact that we need so much in deferred maintenance and strategic reserve, then maybe it's prudent for me to stop there. And you guys probably were following things. I was trying to make sure that we have enough unsworn officers for the civilianization initiative of the sheriff's department. But I think that's a noble experiment and something that I'll continue to support. But looks like they have at least enough to get going on that. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. Mr. Lavany, no.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, and did I say homeless tracking?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So based on whatever we do up here, the 4.4 million that's coming back, where is that headed if we don't do anything with it? It's going back into the strategic reserve?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, so one time, you know, before I get started, there's a group of people I wanted to thank, and this has been a year where we did, I think every meeting, it seemed like we were talking about cannabis. And I want to thank constituents, especially those up in Tepiscay, that continued to hold my feet and our feet to the fire and fully fund a enforcement team. And I'm very pleased with the $1.7 million for a very robust, I think, enforcement team that's going to help us level the playing field. And the message is to those folks that are out there that don't want to be part of our regulatory environment, it's the days of sliding under the radar are over. So I will move on now to my attachment E. So for ongoing, I think the the DA's subpoena server for $67,000, probation DPO, and I think $120,000. Libraries, I'm not sure what number yet, so let's go with $150 for right now. And that takes care of my, I'll take the, what was it, the $39,000 and a gift certificate. So we're done there. One time,
Far Western.
Yeah, the Far Western place. Libraries, so $50,000 to figure out exactly what we're doing. Let's drop down to Union Valley Parkway Extension for $155. And I guess, to be fair and consistent, I'll go the 180 for the solar ordinance so I can see that we maintain something there. Homeless tracking, $10,000. And then the rest from me would go into strategic reserve. But, well, I guess we split it up. So I can go with the 1.1 million into deferred and the rest goes into strategic reserve. 3.1. I'm not against a parks master plan, but for me, $350,000, the way we usually take the amount of time, I'm worried that by the time we figured out what to do with our parks master plan, that Prop 68 will be a distant memory. So I think we almost have to do this on the ground, on the fly, and I know Supervisor Hartmann's already been leading the charge on this, so that might be something in the hydrology study and the cloud-based internet, all things I'd be interested in once we determine how much is flowing in through the cannabis tax.
Other question, Mr. Lavin, you know, the clean energy roadmap has to get done before the solar ordinance can get started. Is that included or not included in your mind?
So this is the extraction he was talking about. Yeah, we'll do the clean energy roadmap, which will give us the solar ordinance and Union Valley Parkway extension.
Supervisor Hartmann.
Adam.
Oh, no, your light's on. Supervisor Wolf.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify a couple things, the probation DPO, if you could just clarify it's for sex offender. And then CEO Miyasato asked me about everyone's including the cannabis tax. So why don't you put that back up for me? And then, I don't know, I guess what I would say is that my balance should go into I gave what I called it should go into the measure, what I believe should be called a Measure T cannabis tax fund to be allocated later.
And supervisors, just if you go up on the ongoing, just so that we're not shortchanging people what they asked for. I believe for the probation officer, it was 124. Is that correct?
Oh, I'll change mine to that. Thank you.
Supervisor Adam.
Well, you guys are going to cause me to throw my 3-page speech away.
Is that good or bad?
Well, you know,
He's in shock.
yeah, I worked hard on that speech.
You did it last year.
Yeah, no, I've been giving it for the last 5. That's one of the lines in my.
Can we just air the tape from last year?
Let's say we did not do it. Okay. No, I feel like you guys are being very responsible here, and I want to support you, which is just shocking. I don't know how the hell that's going to do it. So I'm going to make this easy, and I'm going to just going to use Supervisor Lavanino's list. So cut and paste. And that'll be easy.
Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Wolf.
I think we need to clarify the library. If it's ongoing to small libraries, I was thinking it was ongoing for all libraries, and I'm talking about the top part.
Yeah, I think the issue, of course, is that that won't stop 4, 5 small libraries from closing hours. 180 grand put into per cap basically just helps the large libraries. Doesn't help the small ones, and so.
So are those the 5? I just want to know where it's going. Are those the 5 unincorporated libraries that were mentioned?
I think the ones we went over last week were Guadalupe, Solvang, Carpinteria, Montecito, and Los Alamos, maybe Cuyama. So 5 or 6 ones that are operating in heavy deficits.
Can I just ask Mr. Champion just to verify that? Not that I don't believe you, Mr. Chair Williams, just to clarify.
Chair Williams and members of the board, I believe they are the ones. Carpinteria is one of them. Montecito is also another one. solving with a slight budget deficit.
And then Guadalupe is in
Guadalupe
big
is
trouble.
one of the major ones.
But the smaller deficit in dollar figure, but decent in size of their library would be Los Alamos and Cuyama, too. Supervisor Lavanino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, on strategic reserve, I think we are not lined up. So if we go down to that, because we have 2 at 1.5 and 2 at 2.9. And then we have a Measure T cannabis tax fund. So I don't know if it's okay with Supervisor Adam, but I would go ahead and change my strategic reserve to 1.5 and put the balance in a Measure T cannabis tax fund or whatever we want to call it, if we are going to have a different fund for it. I mean, it's the same thing to me in my mind, but it's just basically saving the money.
You wouldn't go for a little bit in cloud-based internet?
If I knew what it was, I might spend money on it.
It's 3 magic beans. And you climb
Supervisor Hartman.
I guess this is a question. This is the budget hearing. This is the opportunity to look at the whole. Could we put asterisks by what we don't want to spend the money for until it comes in, but nonetheless get it on this chart now?
I think staff are prepared to do that if we really want to go there. I think that's opening up a huge can of worms in terms of workflow for staff, especially considering that we are setting aside the majority of the money into deferred maintenance strategic reserve and potentially the Measure T cannabis tax fund, also known as the Bank of Unicorns and Rainbows. I think that it would be more of an issue if we were spending the lion's share of it on immediate projects and staffing, but we're not.
Mr. Chair.
I would question, I mean, let's go, why don't we go through a couple of the items that there seems to be some support for, but is not overwhelming, and to see if there is political will on some of those. Can we just go item by item so that we can see if people speak now or forever hold their peace? And the ESI team project leader, Joan, can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think this is a very small outlay and would double, triple, quadruple this expenditure, but we need to have this in place to be able to access those outside funds. So this is leverage, and I would really plea, this would be my outstanding plea to fund this one.
Yeah, I think the staff report was that it leverages an equal amount or in outside funding. And it is to get grant opportunities for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects.
Supervisor Wolf, you wouldn't consider it?
So this is where I am. I actually liked your idea about the asterisks, because my problem is, it's not that I disagree with any of these things that you all have your votes for. I just can't in good conscience say, yes, this is what we're going to do, when we don't know that we have the money. If there were asterisks there, that would obviously be very, very helpful for me. And I could probably vote for the whole thing. And we'd have a unanimous vote. I just can't do it right now. Not that you need a unanimous vote. You have your 4 votes. I can't do it unless there's some kind of asterisk that says this is dependent upon us getting the money.
Well, on the ongoing ones were not dependent on marijuana.
That's correct. Although I'm not real pleased about the library per capita, but that's neither here nor there because you have the votes for that. I'm talking about the other, the lower portion, the one time. The ongoing, there's enough funding for.
Could I trade you up the library in exchange for my $75,000?
So you do the 180 ongoing per capita?
I'll never refer to it as per capita,
I know
but
you
I
won't.
would.
So let me make sure I understand this. So you would be still funding the small libraries, but you're calling it per capita? What's the?
You're asking me?
Yeah.
That we would have an additional $180,000 to help libraries that are in trouble make it this year until we can put something better in place that's more